Hi, everyone. It's just for us as a jury, this has been absolutely joyful from the beginning to the end, everything. The projects that we've visited, the fantastic organization, and also our discussions in the group, which has been very, very constructive all along, and we've had the opportunity to see your work. I would like to start with you and the Enrico Fermi School in Torino. To us, it seems it's an incredibly mature work, piece of architecture, and you're very young, and you just graduated recently, is that correct?
I'm 37 actually.
Yeah, but I graduated when I was like, I had my diploma at 30 something.
No. I graduated like me and Alberto and
Yeah.
I, we graduated 10 years ago.
10 years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah.
yeah.
But
So it's relatively recent then,
Yeah.
anyway. I think we can all agree that the future, a key activity for architectures in the future is working with existing structures rather than building from a new, which your project is a beautiful example of. And somehow, to us, it seemed that with your project, not only did you add additional function, improve structure and everything you explained, but you also sort of managed to describe and create a new coherency and sort of amplify the existing building and make it become nobler and better. And how would you what's the way to go about working with existing structures, which are not necessarily masterpieces of architecture, but how do you sort of find the qualities and bring them out and amplify them in the way you did in your project?
I think it's, well, at least to me, to us, it's not really easy to have like a common response to these questions, because I really think it depends a lot on the situations. So in this case, we really wanted to achieve this coherence in the intervention, but I'm quite sure that it really depends on the situation we are working on. Currently, we are working on other renovation projects, and we are adopting different system, because I really think that it's a matter of an attitude on how do you approach and how much you listen or you see and you try to understand how spaces work, what is really the need of that situation specifically. So I think that at least for us, we find fascinating to work within existing structures and situations, not only because it is also the future, as someone was already mentioning earlier today, but also because we find fascinating to confront ourselves with the limits and with the constraints that a situation has, that can rise new questions and making maybe also in doubt some of the position that you have taken in other situation and in other in other occasions. So I really think that it's a matter of how do you say things somehow.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that by asking, because it's always so fascinating you showing us the images of the new version of this, this previously neglected, maybe slightly unloved 60s building, kind of given a new lease of life and extended. And what has been the resonance in the community? I mean, you really investigated the needs of the community and the educators and the school kids, it seems. How has that made itself, how's that been expressed now in the way the building has now been kind of extended, and how does it resonate in terms of how is it already being reflected how education is changing, or the approach even from the teachers? Is that something that is already evident?
Today, you mean? Well, I think that of course it really depends on on the people also, and well, this confrontation was very useful for us, not only because it really get us into the topic that we didn't know, because it was the first school that we were working on. So, and there were, as I was mentioning, some improvement also that were embedded in the design, like for example the library. At the beginning we follow the indication in the design brief and provide a different organization of the space, but then we understood that the teachers were more open, no, to also adopt different situations, and so we provided that like kind of hybrid solutions. And I think that today the school is used by the teachers, as we were discussing together a lot during our confrontation. But it's also, my impression also is that those processes are super important, but when they stop, of course, there is a moment in which they stop, because you, as an architect, you can't be there forever, you know. You do your work, you do the best you can to provide an infrastructure that could be adapted and could be used in different manners, but then it really depends on how people follow, and how they are really into the space. So I think it's still a process ongoing, but I would say that it's quite working in this direction. Also in the COVID, I didn't mention this during the presentation, but I think that the generosity of the spaces we have also was very helpful to make. It was really helpful to make the school, the spaces used really, and to make the school resistant to this problem somehow. So, yes. Thank you.
So about La Borda, I mean, another first project, another first building, which became something of a mission and really emerged from a kind of activism with the community. And I think on a sort of stage like this, with the EUmies Award and with a project in Barcelona embedded here, I think it would be interesting to hear what would your message be with the building in terms of social housing policy and affordable housing, and is that message being responded to, let's say, on a kind of level of housing policy? I mean, I know that's setting the bar very high, but this is your building, your first building, has created a lot of a great resonance in the architectural community. What's the message that La Borda would be sending out to municipalities thinking about, you know, affordable housing in the future?
Thank you. Well, I think that sometimes we used to say that we were really innocent at the beginning of La Borda. It was the first collective housing project, and I think that we didn't know even the conflicts in the process, and also how regulations, how change certain things, how difficult it would be. But I think that maybe because we didn't know it, we just made kind of this journey. And precisely, I think this is a huge learning, that realize that this kind of projects, because are also kind of linked, certain technicians, politicians, the communities, are opportunities to just kind of experiment and change things. And I think that precisely this idea that sometimes this idea of testing, it's really important. And I think that probably there are mistakes, but also a lot of learnings. And probably I think that I would suggest that do not have the fear of testing. And I think that also from the technicians we have the responsibility of make all these proposals. Also, I think it's a huge effort, but also responsibility. So I would say that if a regulation can be changed, or certain kind of conditions probably can be kind of escape. So just kind of invite people to imagine. And I also was kind of thinking that when we presented the project at the beginning to certain housing agencies in Barcelona, there were a fear of the user, because it was kind of unknown in the typical collective housing of the social housing project. No? And I think that because of that, I think that the work of Marta and Jose is really important, because without knowing, they are proposing. So I would also think that this idea of the fear of the user is something also to be reversed.
I would like to ask a question regarding the building, which is very much rooted in its neighborhood and here in Barcelona. And you described very well the process with all the users, the architects. How, and you talked about the typology in terms of giving flexibility and in terms of natural ventilation. How would you situate your project as a typology typical for Barcelona? Because we had this discussion in the jury, and to some jury members, they felt that it was also very related to courtyard buildings in Barcelona. In your case, the courtyard becomes this wonderful covered space with all the shared spaces around it. But was there also an element of sort of historic collective housing buildings linked with very innovative elements, like the fact that it's the highest CLT building in Barcelona? I would be curious to hear a bit about this.
Yeah, probably I think that regarding, for example, like this courtyard, I think that when we started the project, it was kind of the first phase. It was also trying to imagine. We call it like ideas forza, which it's kind of like the main ideas of the project, or kind of the vectors of the project. And one of those ideas was this idea of popular architecture, and that's and also this idea, like it was a project from the neighborhood, linked to also worker neighborhood, and also claim of kind of this. Trying to bring certain typologies, and the Corrala, it was one, which it's not specifically from Catalonia, probably. It's more from the center, Madrid, and the south of Spain. But it was also present in some workshops done with the users. There was people like people bringing images of those courtyards, also with the water in the middle, which is part of this common infrastructure. So it was something beautiful. And of course, it was also a moment of working with the hierarchy of the typology, with many projects being developed in this line. So it was also something that we wanted to implement, and which is not that far from the typical typology in La Champla, which is kind of a connection of rooms that can work differently during the year, summer, winter. So I think that there is kind of certain tradition of this typology is also present here in Barcelona.
Okay, finally, Shelley and Yvonne. I mean, I think it was quite a revelation to all of us in the jury to know more as we were taken around the building by you, to know more about the quite radical agenda that was developed in the program by those responsible, by the Vice-Chancellor and the librarians and those responsible for the dance school for this building. And it was also equally a revelation to know that, in fact, they'd kind of pushed the envelope so far, because initially you had conceived the building, these two programs, as actually quite kind of separate. And so, there was a long process of dialogue, and this must have been also a challenge. I mean, you had an initial sort of struggle with this merging of these programs that had quite different spatial needs. So I think it would be interesting to know, as part of this kind of whole narrative, this backstory of, you know, a kind of a radical agenda for education, which, if you were to choose, like, I don't know, one or two spatial elements that really, that were a direct result of this dialogue with the educators about what the program should be and how these two worlds should be brought together, and that even may have surprised you, you know, as experienced architects, that may have surprised you about where education is headed, you know, and how that manifested itself finally spatially for you. Which elements would those be?
I'll start. The struggle actually happened internally in Grafton Architects before we submitted the competition, in terms of what kind of project we would make, whether it would be an elemental, let's say, form-driven project, or whether it would be when we were looking at the film today of you on the jury, I think it was Marcel raised the question of infrastructure. And we started to think about this needing to be a piece of educational infrastructure which was like a loose weave that could allow this vision to flourish. And in a way, it made us to work differently in that we stood back a little from architecture, let's say. And actually, something really interesting Marina Tabassum said when she was in the Biennale, in our Biennale in Venice. She talked about her building in Pakistan that she made as little intervention as possible in order that architecture would become more present. And we found that amazing because sometimes, and it came up in some of the discussions today, I think, how present is architecture? Or it's always present, obviously. And what is it that architecture has to do when you're offered a proposition like Kingston University offered? And so we really started to think about this thing of making something adaptable and loose and changeable. And it's as old as the hills, you could say, concrete frame structure. There was a question about big spans and what we could make this car park type structure do, how we could stretch a very economical, you could say almost neutral weave or web, spatial web, within which this university could take ownership. And I think we all enjoyed how adaptable that was, just the process, that no matter what Kingston asked us to do afterwards, it wasn't that, oh my God, they've moved the tower and we've lost the project. It was more like playing an instrument, and there was something very giving about the project in itself. And that's a very interesting thing about competitions, because sometimes a competition entry is not robust enough to survive. And sometimes it is, and it grows. And we felt that it grew. It actually had to shrink because of planning and all of those things. But there was a lovely looseness which we felt, which made us more relaxed about the process. And then there was the interpretation by the clients of the possibilities. And the fact that Stephen mentioned it this morning, that the jury was kept on, that the jury challenged us, as did the client, as happens to all architects. We should admit this, don't we? Again, back is against the wall at times. But it just, I hope the team would agree that the kind of DNA of the project was able to grow and adapt and change. That's what I really enjoyed about it.
Shelley, you talk about the shape of the space and its orientation. Huh? You know, the main space. What I was suggesting to Shell was that she should speak. You asked what things wouldn't change or did change, or what changed to the process.
Yeah. No, you're good. We proposed to Kingston that the central space, that the audience should face the foyer. And Kingston thought this was back to front. And we said, yes, but it means that the foyer can enter into dialogue with the audience. Sean, don't feel guilty. And we were challenged by that. And the jury, one day, it was actually suggested that maybe we shouldn't push it when we were speaking to our IBA jury who continued the process. Don't push it, turning the audience the wrong way around. And one of the jury members said, why don't you turn the audience the other way around? and it was perfect because it meant that instead of an audience turning its back to the foyer, that it could face the foyer. So it's a back to front space, and that was great. Wasn't it? It was a really good moment, and there was also this really interesting thing of a jury staying on, is that as mature architects, other architects never tell you what they think unless they like a project. So if they don't like a project, it's always in the background. You hear it in a pub or something, but nobody tells you straight. But what was interesting about this jury, here we were, 38, 39, a little more, and being kind of reviewed by colleagues in an open, honest way, and that was fantastic. And I think it was also a wonderful day when we were being leaned on by the theatre department, and they wanted lighting and speakers and sound control and acoustic barriers. And one member of the jury said, "But hang on, this is a democratic space. Do you want a theatre or do you want a democratic space?" And there was this lovely discussion about, okay, if there's a bit of sound leakage, it's not the end of the world if the space works as a democratic space. And those conversations were very important to be open, to be had.
Looking at your wonderful presentation with references, details, showing a bit of how you work, I thought I wanted to ask you about something that I find very significant in your project, actually. It's interesting what you say about the great flexibility and the possibilities of the structure. To me, it seems what you've done, that all the threshold spaces in your project are wonderful possibilities for very specific conditions. I mean, you talked about the black box that isn't a black box, but that is in fact open to the entire building, and where you can actually sit and watch dancers and see somebody studying for an exam on a different level. Or the relation to the streets, where this double colonnade becomes sort of terraces and gangways. And it seems to me that the way you've treated these transitions from one space to another, or from one function to another, that it's kind of one of the keys to the wonderful richness in your project. And also, maybe it's a question, it's what helps this interlinking of and fluidity of function. I was thinking this dancing staircase, that it's also a threshold space somehow, to go from one level to another. And the same again for the on the rooftop. The rooftop cafe is sort of a belvedere to see the whole Kingston, and to me that is, there seems to be this sort of the flexibility, all the possibilities of the structure can very much together with these very specific threshold situations. Maybe it's
in response to it. It's you reminded me that the building is on Penwyn Road, and I won't do a Welsh accent and say it's Penwyn, but Penwyn means a kind of height, promontory. And what's interesting about that is that from language and from word, that the building becomes, if you like, a promontory, or the main house, or the new entrance into, or the new celebration of the university. But your question about complex section, I think that it's, as Shell describes, the liberation of the concrete frame, that it allows, it can play it tall and lower and higher. What I find amazing is when we move up the stairs, and you're on the first place, then you move along, and there's another place which is taller, and then students decide that they want the sound or the silence of that particular place to study. That by slight modification of the same thing, that you get richness, and that you get transparency. I think one of the, when Shell was describing the kind of Greek reference and the discussion of sound, one of the main overlapping requirements of this building was for kind of silence and noise and dance and visual and separation and joining, that the framework allows that both intellectually and physically, that you set up a matrix. And Shell describes also the building was taller, but there were planning concerns, so it had to be, if you like, reduced. But it didn't reduce the spatial relationship. Also, what we did in terms of sustainability and not carving into the ground. There's no basement, so it was really sitting on the ground. And the frame allowed for bigger spaces, medium-sized spaces. It allows for relationships that are taller and lower. It allowed for spatial design, really, and overlap and transparency. So it allowed for freedom, really.
Could I just say one thing? One thing I really loved, because it's, you probably found the same, when the jury comes to town, you're getting ready and you spend time, it's like cleaning your house before a guest comes. You know, you get ready and you go back over the building and think about things, and we spent a lot of time there. And it's also lovely being there where you're not dealing with questions or problems or leaks or any of those kind of awful things that happen to us as architects. But what I was really conscious of, that the building was full of young people, and there was not one figure of authority, none. There was no control, no security guards, no old person. I think I was the oldest person there. Or you, Yvonne? You know, but we were in this building full of young people from all different nationalities, all different cultures, and some of them were laughing, and some of them were serious and working, and some of them were sweating and dancing, and you know, and it was just amazing that there was nobody in control, but yet there was control, and that these people were enjoying the building. And that was a real pleasure for me. I'm sure your residents are the same, are they, when you see them happy?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I know. Yeah, totally. It's always fantastic to see enjoying the building and feeling that the building belongs to them, no? Exactly.
I think we also very much had the feeling, or at least I had, that you could go there with a friend or with somebody, but you could also go there alone and not feeling alone. You could work or have a coffee or read or whatever, but that's truly a civic building. I know there are no more questions, and my previous question wasn't maybe a question. So how has this taught you something, how we can make more civic buildings in our society, that's buildings that we need so desperately, not the least now? Maybe it's a question for all of you. Yeah.
It would be good if, you know, we've had this conversation a little bit among our fantastic team of architects. I think what it has taught us is that standing back a little as an architect, I think Francesca talks about it as well, about being quiet. You know, that when you stand back and see, well, what is this thing really trying to be? And that it's not about us. Very often, buildings we make, maybe we thought, well, this is our building or something, but it's not about us. It's about what the need or the requirement is. And it's so liberating to do that. It's such a liberating thing to do, to stand aside, see what happens, and then move back in as the implementer or translator.
No, please.
I was just saying that I agree totally, and sorry, I agree totally. It's good to have a sort of distance and knowing that you're providing space for things to happen that will be probably also not totally under your control, because you can provide, you can imagine how space could work, you can think how the organization of the structure you're designing will provide new opportunities to people, but at the same time, I think that it's very important to give that, not to over-determine too much a space in order to make possible things that are unexpected also to happen.
I think that I was totally agree with the previous comment, and I think that in our case it was kind of unfinished, absolutely. No? And I was kind of thinking that I think it's a matter of different scales. That I think that this civic infrastructure, I would think that every building has a possibility in the terms of kind of the surroundings, kind of and I think that this idea that we can even include the surroundings and give a response. And I think that understand that maybe we are working from the wall inside, but I think that there is kind of an impact outside, and I think that is something. And then every kind of scale and spaces. And in case of La Borda, we're talking about housing, but I would say that now the guest room sometimes is used by evicted people from the surroundings. So I think that there is kind of a social return and a civic infrastructure in kind of different decisions of the project. No, I think that it's a matter of being conscious about the possibilities of it, and let the infrastructure be used.
Well, I mean, I speak for all of the jury, and you say your piece too, please. But this has been, I think, the enriching experience of seeing these projects of the finalists, and traveling and hearing each of the stories and the unfolding of a narrative, the process of a design strategy emerging and evolving through dialogue, through strong civic responsibility. I mean, it's been, I think that is such a crucial aspect of communicating architecture to a wider audience. You need this storytelling, you need the background, you need these anecdotes to show this kind of very humanistic and the perspective, and this kind of empathetic process as well of mutual cooperative design that's really been part of actually all of these finalists' projects. And I think it's going to be very exciting to be part as much as possible of the next stages of the exhibition, because that will also kickstart further dialogues and discussions that are important when it comes to these qualities of architectural inspiration and the process of design, and that with the clients. I think that was absolutely crucial to feature this, and I think it's been really enriching. I want to thank everyone involved, and really exciting to see what impacts can be made with this award, and everything that goes with it. Thank you.